The sun hung low over the dusty horizon as Tabitha Keller clutched her worn leather satchel, scanning the bustling train platform of Laramie, Wyoming Territory. The year was 1876, and she had traveled over 1,000 miles on nothing more than a promise in a letter and the desperate hope for a better life. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the train hissed and groaned behind her, belching steam into the cool autumn air. Last call for passengers. The conductor shouted, but Tabitha remained rooted in place. She was packed for a man she'd never met, a stranger who had advertised for a bride in a newspaper back east. A man named Howard Miller, who described himself as a prosperous rancher in need of a proper, God-fearing woman to share his life. Her last $3 had been spent on a telegram announcing her arrival, but as she scanned the sea of unfamiliar faces, no one stepped forward to claim her. "Miss, you looking for someone?" A deep voice startled her from behind. Tabitha turned to find herself face to face with a tall man whose features were partially obscured by the shadow cast by his wide-brimmed hat. His shoulders were broad beneath a worn duster, and his eyes, piercing blue even in the fading light, studied her with undisguised interest. "I'm waiting for Mr. Howard Miller," she said, lifting her chin despite her growing unease. "He's expecting me." A muscle twitched in the stranger's jaw. "Howard Miller, you say?" He looked away, then back at her with something resembling pity. "Miss, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Howard Miller won't be coming." Cold dread washed over her. "What do you mean? Has something happened?" "Miller's been gone these past 3 weeks, caught in a flash flood while crossing the Sweetwater." The stranger's voice softened. "I'm sorry, madam, truly." Tabitha's knees weakened. Dead. The man she'd traveled across the country to marry was dead. The platform seemed to tilt beneath her feet, and she reached blindly for the nearest post to steady herself. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I received a letter from him just last month. We had an arrangement." The stranger sighed, pushing his hat back to reveal a weathered face that couldn't be more than 30 years old, though life had clearly etched its hardships upon it. "Miller wasn't what you might call honorable, miss. He made arrangements with half a dozen women this past year." "Half a dozen?" Tabitha's voice cracked. "Yes, madam." He hesitated. "The name's Flynn Norwood. I ranch outside of Chisholm Ranch, about 40 miles south of here in Colorado Territory." He gestured to the dusty street beyond the station. "I'd be willing to help you get settled somewhere, maybe find work in town until you can arrange passage back east." Tabitha's mind raced with panic. She had no money, no family willing to take her back, and now no prospective husband. Her uncle's final words echoed in her mind. "You leave now, girl. Don't you ever think to darken my door again." She swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "That's very kind, Mr. Norwood, but Tabitha Keller," a stout man in a tailored suit approached, consulting a small notebook. "Mrs. Tabitha Keller, Miss Keller," she corrected, clinging to the last shreds of her dignity. "I'm not married." The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "But you are expecting to marry Mr. Howard Miller. I represent the Westward Matrimonial Agency. Mr. Miller made arrangements through our service." Flynn Norwood stepped forward. "Miller's dead, Simmons. You know that as well as I do." The man named Simmons barely spared Flynn a glance. "Indeed, an unfortunate circumstance. However, our contract stipulates that in such events the agency is obligated to find a suitable replacement husband." He turned to Tabitha with a practiced smile. "We have arranged for Mr. Jonathan Wells to meet you. He has a modest homestead near Buford, some 60 miles from here." "Buford?" Flynn's voice hardened. "That's Blackfoot territory, Simmons. No place for a woman alone." "Mr. Wells will provide adequate protection, I assure you," Simmons continued as though Flynn hadn't spoken. "The stagecoach leaves tomorrow morning, I've secured you lodging at the Harvey house for tonight." Tabitha's head spun with this new development. Another stranger, another promise. She looked from Simmons to Flynn Norwood, whose face had darkened considerably. "I don't know," she began hesitantly. "Miss Keller," Flynn interrupted, his voice low and urgent. "A word in private." Before she could respond, he had taken her elbow and guided her several paces away from Simmons, who watched with obvious annoyance. "Listen carefully," Flynn said, his eyes locked on hers. "Jonathan Wells is no rancher. He runs girls, brings them west with promises of marriage, and puts them to work in the saloons and brothels along the frontier. Buford's nothing more than 3 buildings and a watering trough, but one of those buildings is Wells' establishment." Tabitha's blood ran cold. "You're saying he's a flesh peddler," Flynn finished grimly. "And Simmons there gets a finder's fee for every girl he delivers." She glanced back at Simmons, who was now pretending to study his notebook, though his eyes kept darting toward them. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Something flickered in Flynn's eyes, determination, perhaps, or something deeper she couldn't quite name. "Because I've seen too many women lured out here with false promises, and I'm tired of finding their graves." He took a deep breath. "Miss Keller, you don't know me from Adam, and I've got no right to ask, but I'm offering you safe passage to Chisholm Ranch. There's decent folk there who'll help you get on your feet. The schoolteacher just left to care for her ailing mother back in St. Louis. They need someone educated." Tabitha studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. "And what would you want in return, Mr. Norwood?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Nothing but the pleasure of thwarting Simmons and his employer. I've been trying to shut down their operation for years." Before she could respond, Simmons approached, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Miss Keller, we really must be going. The Harvey house fills quickly." Flynn's hand moved subtly to the revolver at his hip, not drawing it, but making its presence known. "Miss Keller won't be needing your services, Simmons." The agent's face flushed with anger. "This is none of your concern, Norwood. The lady has an arrangement." "An arrangement with a dead man," Flynn countered. "And now you're trying to sell her to Wells." Simmons sputtered indignantly. "How dare you suggest, Miss Keller," Flynn said, his eyes never leaving Simmons. "Your choice." Tabitha drew herself up, years of being bullied by her uncle having taught her when to recognize a dangerous situation. "Mr. Simmons, I appreciate your agency's concern, but I believe I'll make my own arrangements." Simmons' face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful," he caught himself, forcing a tight smile. "Very well. But I warn you, the frontier is no place for a woman alone. Mr. Wells is a respectable businessman who can provide for you. This cowboy," he gestured dismissively at Flynn, "offers nothing but empty promises." "I offer her a choice," Flynn said quietly, "which is more than you or Wells ever would." Simmons stared at them both for a long moment before turning on his heel. "You'll regret this, Norwood," he called over his shoulder. As the agent stormed away, Tabitha released a shaky breath. "Thank you, Mr. Norwood." Flynn nodded, his posture relaxing slightly. "We should go. Simmons isn't one to give up easily, and Wells has men in town." He hesitated. "I've got a wagon outside. We can be well on our way to Chisholm Ranch by nightfall." For the first time since stepping off the train, Tabitha felt a flicker of hope. Still, caution made her ask, "And you're certain there's work for me there? Teaching?" "Yes, madam. The town council's been advertising back east for weeks. Pay isn't much, but there's a small house that comes with the position, and the folks are decent." He gave her a considering look. "You are educated, I assume?" Tabitha straightened her shoulders. "I was a teacher in Philadelphia for 3 years, Mr. Norwood. I'm more than qualified." A genuine smile spread across his face, transforming his features from merely handsome to something that made Tabitha's heart skip a beat. "Well then, Miss Keller, shall we be on our way?" She glanced back at the train platform, at the life she'd left behind, and the future that had evaporated before her eyes. Then she looked at Flynn Norwood, a stranger offering help with seemingly nothing to gain. It was madness to trust him, and yet something in his steady gaze told her she could. Drawing a deep breath, Tabitha nodded. "Yes, Mr. Norwood, I believe we shall." As they made their way through the crowded streets, Flynn keeping a protective hand near her elbow, Tabitha caught sight of Simmons speaking urgently with two rough-looking men outside a saloon. The men's eyes tracked their progress, and one began to move in their direction. Flynn saw them too. "Keep walking," he murmured. "My wagon's just around the corner." They quickened their pace, and as they rounded the corner, Flynn guided her to a sturdy wagon hitched to two strong horses. He helped her climb onto the wooden seat, then swiftly loaded her satchel in the back. "Those men," Tabitha began, her voice trembling slightly. "Wells' men," Flynn confirmed, climbing up beside her. "Like I said, Simmons doesn't give up easy." He took up the reins and clicked to the horses. As the wagon lurched forward, he turned to her with a determined expression. "Miss Keller, I need to be clear about something. Those men back there, they'll follow us. Wells doesn't like losing merchandise." Tabitha flinched at the crude description but appreciated his honesty. "What will we do?" Flynn's jaw set in a hard line. "We'll outrun them if we can, outfight them if we must." His eyes met hers. "But I promise you this. You're not leaving with anyone but me." The fierce protectiveness in his voice sent a shiver down Tabitha's spine, not of fear, but of something else entirely. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Safe. As the wagon picked up speed, leaving Laramie behind, Tabitha Keller realized that her journey had only just begun. The wagon rattled along the rutted trail, each jolt making Tabitha grip the wooden seat tighter. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and dust swirled around them, coating her traveling dress in a fine layer of grit. Flynn Norwood handled the reins with practiced ease, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon and the trail behind them. "How far is it to Chisholm Ranch?" Tabitha asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "About 40 miles as the crow flies," Flynn replied. "But we won't make it all the way there tonight. There's a way station about 15 miles south where we can rest the horses and get a hot meal. The owner's a friend." Tabitha nodded, trying to ignore the growing ache in her back from the rough journey. She had been traveling for nearly 2 weeks already, and the discomfort of the train seemed luxurious compared to this bone-jarring wagon. "Tell me about this town," she said, desperate for distraction. "What kind of people will I be teaching?" Flynn's expression softened. "Good people, mostly. Ranchers, shopkeepers, a few miners, about 20 children of school age. The town's growing, got a general store, blacksmith, 2 saloons, even a small church that doubles as the schoolhouse during the week." "And what do you do there, Mr. Norwood? You mentioned you ranch." "I run cattle on about 800 acres outside of town. Nothing fancy, but the land's good and the water's reliable." He glanced at her. "It's Flynn, by the way. No need for formalities when we're sharing a wagon seat." Tabitha hesitated, then nodded. "Tabitha, then." "Tabitha," he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. "Pretty name." She felt a blush creep up her neck and quickly changed the subject. "Have you lived in Colorado Territory long, since '68? "Came west after the war with not much more than the horse I was riding and the clothes on my back." He didn't elaborate, and Tabitha didn't press. The war had left scars on many men, both visible and invisible. "And your family, are they in Chisholm Ranch as well?" Something flickered across Flynn's face, a shadow of old grief. "No family, not anymore. I'm sorry," she said softly. He shrugged, his shoulders a tense line. It was a long time ago. They fell silent again, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady clop of the horses' hooves. Tabitha found herself studying Flynn's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hat shadowed his eyes, the slight furrow between his brows as he concentrated on the trail. "What about you?" he asked suddenly. "What brings a Philadelphia schoolteacher out to Wyoming Territory to marry a stranger?" It was Tabitha's turn to stiffen. "Necessity," she replied, her tone clipped. Flynn raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "Fair enough." Tabitha sighed, immediately regretting her curtness. After all, this man had potentially saved her from a fate worse than death. "My parents died of influenza when I was 16, she offered. "I went to live with my uncle, who allowed me to finish my education on the condition that I then earn my keep by teaching. When I turned 21 last year, he made it clear I had overstayed my welcome." Flynn's hands tightened on the reins. "He turned you out?" "Not exactly. He arranged a marriage for me to a widower of 65 with grown children my age." Tabitha's throat tightened at the memory. "When I refused, he gave me a choice: accept the marriage or leave his home and never return." "So you left," Flynn said, understanding in his voice. "I left," she confirmed. "I taught at a small school while I saved enough money for passage west and answered Mr. Miller's advertisement." She gave a bitter laugh. "I thought I was being so practical, so independent, and look where it's gotten me." "Seems to me you've shown considerable courage," Flynn said quietly. "Not many would have the fortitude to leave everything familiar behind and start anew." Before Tabitha could respond, Flynn suddenly pulled the wagon to a halt, his body tensing as he stared at something in the distance. "What is it?" she asked, alarmed. "Riders," he said tersely. "3 of them coming fast from the direction of Laramie." Tabitha's heart began to race. "Wells' men?" Flynn nodded grimly. "Likely." He reached beneath the seat and pulled out a Winchester rifle. "Can you shoot?" "No," she admitted. "Then you drive." He handed her the reins and quickly showed her how to hold them. "Just keep the horses moving. Follow the trail and don't stop no matter what happens." "What are you going to do?" Panic edged her voice. Flynn checked the rifle's chamber. "Try to discourage them from following." His eyes locked with hers. "Tabitha, listen to me. If something happens to me, keep going south. The way station's owner is named Jeremiah Black. Tell him Flynn Norwood sent you, and he'll see you safely to Chisholm Ranch." "Nothing's going to happen to you," she insisted, even as fear knotted her stomach. A tight smile touched his lips. "Your confidence is heartening." He moved to the back of the wagon, positioning himself behind the supplies. "Now drive." Tabitha slapped the reins as Flynn had shown her, and the horses lurched forward. Behind her, she could hear Flynn readying his rifle. The riders were closer now, close enough that she could see they wore no badges or uniforms. Just men on horseback, closing the distance rapidly. "Faster," Flynn called, and Tabitha urged the horses to a gallop. The wagon bounced violently over the rough terrain, and she gripped the reins until her knuckles turned white, fighting to keep control. A shot rang out from behind them, and Tabitha flinched, nearly dropping the reins. Another shot followed, this one from Flynn's rifle. One of the pursuing riders yelled in pain. "Got one in the shoulder," Flynn reported. "Might make them think twice." But the remaining 2 riders pressed on, returning fire. Bullets whizzed past, one splintering the wood of the wagon seat inches from Tabitha's thigh. She bit back a scream, focusing on keeping the horses moving. Flynn fired again, and one of the horses chasing them reared, throwing its rider. The 3rd man pulled up, apparently unwilling to continue the pursuit alone. "They're falling back," Flynn said, relief evident in his voice. He moved forward to take the reins back from Tabitha, whose hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold them. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes quickly scanning her for injuries. Tabitha nodded, unable to trust her voice just yet. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "You did well," Flynn said, genuine admiration in his tone. "Not many would keep their head like that in their first gunfight." "I sincerely hope it's my last," Tabitha managed, her voice trembling. Flynn's expression darkened. "I doubt Wells will give up that easily, but we've bought ourselves some time." He glanced at the sun, now sinking toward the western horizon. "We'll push on to the way station. We should reach it by nightfall." Tabitha tried to calm her racing heart. "This Mr. Wells, he seems to go to a lot of trouble for women he hasn't even met." Flynn's jaw tightened. "It's not about you personally, it's about control and money. Girls like you, educated, respectable, fetch a high price in certain establishments. Wells has built his fortune on broken promises and ruined lives. And you've made an enemy of him," Tabitha observed. A grim smile touched Flynn's lips. "Let's just say we have a history. I've helped more than a few women escape his clutches over the years." He glanced at her. "But that's a story for another time. Right now, we need to focus on getting you safely to Chisholm Ranch." As they continued south, the landscape gradually changed. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. The air grew cooler as the elevation increased, and Tabitha found herself grateful for the shawl she had packed. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of purple and gold, Tabitha was exhausted. Every muscle ached from the tension and the rough journey. Just when she thought she couldn't endure another minute, Flynn pointed to a cluster of lights in the distance. "The way station," he announced. "We'll be safe there for the night." The way station turned out to be a sturdy log building with a large stable attached. A weathered sign proclaimed it Black's Rest. As they approached, a tall, barrel-chested man with a shock of white hair emerged from the main building, a lantern held high. "That you, Flynn?" the man called. "It's me, Jeremiah," Flynn replied, drawing the wagon to a halt. "Got a guest with me." Jeremiah Black approached, his bushy eyebrows rising as he took in Tabitha's disheveled appearance. "Evening, madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Welcome to Black's Rest." "Thank you, sir," Tabitha replied, summoning what dignity she could muster after the harrowing day. "We ran into some trouble on the trail," Flynn explained as he helped Tabitha down from the wagon. "Wells' men." Jeremiah's expression hardened. "They follow you here." "Don't think so." Winged one, and the others turned back. Flynn glanced nervously at the darkening trail behind them. "But they might regroup and try again." "Well, they won't find you here," Jeremiah said firmly. "I'll have the boys keep watch tonight." He turned to Tabitha with a kindly smile. "Come inside, miss. My wife will fix you up with some hot food and a place to wash up." Tabitha nearly wept with gratitude at the prospect of food and clean water. As Flynn led the horses toward the stable, Jeremiah escorted her into the main building. The interior was simple but clean, with a large common room dominated by a stone fireplace. Several tables were occupied by travelers, mostly men, though there was one family with 2 small children. A plump woman with gray-streaked hair bustled forward at their entrance. "Martha, this here's Miss Tabitha Keller," Jeremiah introduced. "She's traveling with Flynn Norwood to Chisholm Ranch." Martha Black's warm smile immediately put Tabitha at ease. "Welcome, dear. You look dead on your feet. Come along, I'll show you where you can freshen up, and then we'll get some food in you." Tabitha followed Martha to a small room off the main hall that contained a wash basin, clean towels, and a mirror. For the first time since leaving Laramie, she caught sight of her reflection and barely recognized herself. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its pins, her face was streaked with dust, and her blue traveling dress was filthy. "Take your time, dear," Martha said kindly. "I'll have one of the girls bring you some hot water. There's a bedroom ready for you whenever you're done. Flynn can sleep in the bunkhouse with the other men." Left alone, Tabitha sank onto a small stool and allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. How had her life changed so dramatically in the space of a few hours? This morning, she had been preparing to meet her future husband. Now, she was fleeing men who would sell her into prostitution, relying on the protection of a cowboy she barely knew. And yet, despite the danger and uncertainty, Tabitha couldn't help but feel she had been spared a different kind of fate. Howard Miller from the Little Flynn had said, hadn't been the honest, God-fearing man he'd claimed to be in his letters. What kind of marriage would that have been? A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A young girl, no more than 16, entered with a steaming pitcher of water. "Mrs. Black sent this up, madam," the girl said, setting the pitcher beside the wash basin. "And she said to tell you supper will be ready in half an hour." "Thank you," Tabitha replied with a grateful smile. After the girl left, Tabitha poured the hot water into the basin and began the process of washing away the day's dust and fear. She removed her dress, sponge bathing as best she could before changing into the only other dress she had packed, a simple gray cotton that had seen better days but was at least clean. She brushed and re-pinned her hair, took a deep breath, and returned to the main room. Flynn was already seated at a table near the fire, freshly washed himself, his damp hair curling slightly at the nape of his neck. He stood when he saw her, and something in his expression, a flash of admiration quickly concealed, made Tabitha's cheeks warm. "Miss Keller," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "You look refreshed." "Thank you, Mr. Norwood," she replied, deliberately using the formal address as there were others present. "I feel much better." Martha soon appeared with 2 steaming plates of stew, crusty bread, and cups of strong, hot coffee. Tabitha hadn't realized how hungry she was until the aroma hit her, and she fell upon the meal with unladylike enthusiasm that made Flynn smile. "Jeremiah's arranged for a guard tonight," Flynn informed her between bites. "And we'll leave at first light tomorrow. Should reach Chisholm Ranch by mid-afternoon." Tabitha nodded, too focused on her food to reply immediately. When she had eaten her fill, she set down her spoon with a contented sigh. "That was wonderful." "Martha's the best cook in 3 territories," Flynn agreed. He hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking. We should get your story straight before we reach town." "My story?" "About why you're arriving with me instead of Miller," Flynn explained. "Small towns run on gossip, and the last thing you need is your reputation damaged before you even start teaching." Tabitha hadn't considered this, but he was right. A woman traveling alone with a man she wasn't married to would raise eyebrows, even in the relatively relaxed social climate of the frontier. "What do you suggest?" she asked. Flynn leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The simplest explanation would be that I'm a friend of Miller's who met you at the station to break the news of his death and escort you to Chisholm Ranch." Tabitha considered this. "That seems reasonable. But won't people wonder why I'm staying in Chisholm Ranch when my intended husband is dead?" "We'll say you had already accepted the teaching position through correspondence with the town council," Flynn replied. "That much is true. They have been looking for a teacher. This way, it seems you were coming for the job all along, and the marriage to Miller was secondary." It was a clever fabrication close enough to the truth to be believable while preserving her reputation. "That could work," Tabitha agreed. Flynn nodded, satisfied. "Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow will be another long day." As if on cue, Martha appeared to show Tabitha to her room. It was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand, and a chair by the window. Most importantly, it had a solid door with a lock, a luxury Tabitha didn't take for granted after the day's events. "If you need anything, dear, we're just down the hall," Martha said. "Sleep well." Left alone, Tabitha sank onto the bed, the exhaustion of the day finally catching up with her. As she drifted toward sleep, her thoughts returned to Flynn Norwood. He was a puzzle, rough-edged yet courteous, dangerous yet protective. A man who had put himself at risk for a complete stranger. Why? What drove him to such lengths to protect women from men like Wells? There was a story there, she was certain. Perhaps in time he would share it with her. For now, though, she was safe. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, in this small room with its locked door and the knowledge that someone was standing guard outside, Tabitha Keller slept soundly for the first time in weeks. Morning arrived with a gentle knock at her door. Tabitha stirred, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings until the events of the previous day came rushing back. "Miss Keller," it was Martha's voice. "Breakfast is ready whenever you are. Mr. Norwood says you should be on the trail within the hour." "Thank you, Mrs. Black." "I'll be right out," Tabitha called, quickly rising to dress. The common room was already bustling with travelers when Tabitha entered. Flynn sat at the same table as the night before, nursing a cup of coffee. He stood when he saw her, and Tabitha was struck again by the contrast between his rough exterior and his gentlemanly manners. "Sleep well?" he asked as she joined him. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Any trouble during the night?" Flynn shook his head. "All quiet. With luck, we'll be in Chisholm Ranch before Wells' men figure out where we've gone." Martha brought them a hearty breakfast of flapjacks, bacon, and more coffee. As they ate, Flynn briefed her further on what to expect in Chisholm Ranch. "The town council meets every Monday evening at the church. I reckon they'll want to interview you formally for the teaching position, but given they've been without a teacher for nearly 2 months, I don't foresee any problems." He sipped his coffee. "School term doesn't start until next month, so you'll have time to settle in." "And where will I stay?" Tabitha asked, the practical concern having nagged at her since yesterday. "The schoolteacher's cottage is just behind the church. It's small, just 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but it's solid and weather-tight." Flynn hesitated. "It's been empty since Miss Wilson left, so it might need a bit of cleaning." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Tabitha assured him, thinking of the countless hours she'd spent scrubbing her uncle's floors and laundering his linens. "As long as there's a roof and 4 walls, I'll manage." A hint of a smile touched Flynn's lips. "I don't doubt it." After breakfast, they thanked the Blacks for their hospitality and prepared to depart. Jeremiah had replenished their supplies and watered the horses, refusing payment when Flynn tried to press money into his hand. "Consider it my contribution to thwarting Jonathan Wells," the older man said grimly. "Just get this young lady safely to Chisholm Ranch." "I intend to," Flynn replied, his tone leaving no room for doubt. The day was clear and cool as they set out, the mountains to the west gleaming in the morning light. Tabitha found herself enjoying the scenery now that she wasn't fleeing for her life. The rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers, the distant herds of pronghorn antelope, the occasional stand of aspens with their white trunks and golden leaves. "It's beautiful," she remarked. "Different from anything I've seen before." Flynn nodded, a quiet pride in his expression. "It gets in your blood, this country. I can't imagine living anywhere else now." "How did you come to settle in Chisholm Ranch?" Tabitha asked, curious about the man who had so dramatically altered the course of her life. Flynn was silent for so long that Tabitha thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, as if carefully choosing his words. "After the war, I drifted." Worked as a cowhand, a scout, even tried my hand at mining for a spell. Nothing stuck. He adjusted his hat against the sun's glare. Then in '71, I was riding with a cattle drive that passed through Chisholm Ranch. The town was smaller than barely more than a trading post. But there was land for sale, good water rights, and folks who minded their own business. He paused, his eyes fixed on the horizon. I'd saved some money, enough for a down payment on a small spread, built it up over the years bit by bit. Now I run about 200 head of cattle plus some horses. You built a life from nothing, Tabitha observed. That's admirable, Flynn shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Did what anyone would do. Not anyone, she countered softly. It takes courage to start over in a strange place. Believe me, I know. Their eyes met briefly, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. Then Flynn cleared his throat and returned his attention to the trail. Speaking of starting over, there are some folks in town you should know about, he said, clearly eager to change the subject. Thomas Bedford runs the general store. He's head of the town council and a fair man, though his wife Agatha can be a bit particular. They have 2 children in school age. For the next hour, Flynn outlined the key figures in Chisholm Ranch: the blacksmith who served as the unofficial mayor, the widow who ran the boarding house, the young doctor fresh from medical school back east who was eager to prove himself. Tabitha listened attentively, grateful for the information that would help her navigate her new community. "And what about you?" she asked when he paused. "What's your place in all this?" Flynn seemed surprised by the question. "Me, I keep to myself mostly. Come to town for supplies, attend church when the weather's good, serve on the council when needed, though I try to avoid it." "A solitary life," Tabitha remarked. "It suits me," he replied, though something in his tone suggested it wasn't entirely true. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of cold biscuits and jerky provided by Martha. As they prepared to continue, Flynn grew more alert, his eyes constantly scanning the trail behind them. "Are you worried they've followed us?" Tabitha asked, noting his vigilance. "Just being cautious," he replied, though the tightness around his eyes betrayed his concern. "Wells has a long reach and a long memory. You still haven't told me why he hates you so particularly," Tabitha observed. Flynn checked the cinch on one of the horses before answering. 3 years ago, I came across one of his operations in a mining camp near Durango. He had 5 girls there, none older than 17, all brought west with promises of marriage or respectable work. They were being held against their will." He paused, his jaw clenching. "I got them out. All of them. Found them proper work or passage back east. One of them was Wells' favorite, a girl named Lily who couldn't have been more than 16. He'd kept her for himself." Tabitha's stomach turned at the implication. "What happened to her?" "She's married to a shopkeeper in Denver now. Has a baby." A ghost of a smile touched Flynn's lips. "I check on her whenever I'm in the city. She's doing well." "And Wells never forgave you for taking her," Tabitha concluded. "That and the profit he lost on the other girls." Flynn's expression hardened. "He put a price on my head after that. $500, I heard. Not enough to tempt professional bounty hunters, but enough to make certain men take notice." "Yet you still help women escape him," Tabitha said, admiration coloring her voice. Flynn met her gaze directly. "Some things are worth the risk." The simple statement, delivered without flourish or expectation of praise, stirred something deep within Tabitha. This man, for all his rough edges, possessed a moral compass that many so-called gentlemen of her acquaintance lacked entirely. They continued their journey in companionable silence, the miles passing beneath the wagon wheels as the sun arced across the sky. By mid-afternoon, Flynn pointed to a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley ahead. Chisholm Ranch, he announced. Population 212 last census. Or 213, counting you. Tabitha studied the town with a mixture of trepidation and hope. From this distance, it appeared picturesque, a church steeple rising above the other buildings, neat houses with fenced yards, a main street lined with businesses. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from here she could see people moving about their daily tasks. "It looks peaceful," she said. Flynn nodded. "It is mostly. The kind of place where folks look out for each other." He glanced at her. "You ready for this?" Tabitha took a deep breath. "I don't have much choice, do I?" "There's always a choice, Tabitha," Flynn said quietly. "If you decided right now that you wanted to go somewhere else, Denver, San Francisco, back east, I'd help you get there." The offer, so simply made, nearly brought tears to her eyes. How long had it been since someone had given her a genuine choice rather than an ultimatum? "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I think Chisholm Ranch is exactly where I need to be right now." Flynn held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded, apparently satisfied. "All right then. Let's introduce you to your new home." As they descended into the valley, Tabitha straightened her back and lifted her chin. Whatever awaited her in Chisholm Ranch, she would face it with courage and dignity. She had survived the journey this far, a journey that had already tested her more than she could have imagined when she first boarded that train in Philadelphia. And she hadn't faced it alone. She glanced at Flynn, his profile strong against the afternoon sky, and felt a surge of gratitude and something else. Something warmer that she wasn't quite ready to name. Whatever happened next, Tabitha Keller was determined to make the most of this unexpected chance at a new beginning. Chisholm Ranch grew larger as they approached, the buildings taking shape against the backdrop of rolling hills and distant mountains. The road widened into a proper main street, lined with wooden sidewalks and hitching posts. Several people paused in their activities to watch the wagon pass, curiosity evident in their gazes. "Word travels fast in small towns," Flynn commented, noting Tabitha's nervousness under the scrutiny. "By sundown, everyone will know there's a new schoolteacher in town." They passed a blacksmith shop where a burly man hammered at a glowing piece of iron, a general store with a covered porch where old men sat playing checkers, and a small but tidy-looking hotel called the Ponderosa Inn. At the far end of the street stood the church, a white clapboard building with a modest steeple. Flynn guided the wagon down a side street that ran alongside the church. Behind it, set back about 50 yards, stood a small cottage. It was simple but charming, with a covered porch and what appeared to be the remains of a flower garden, now overgrown. "The schoolteacher's house," Flynn announced, bringing the wagon to a halt. Tabitha studied what was to be her new home with cautious optimism. The cottage needed work, the paint was peeling, and one shutter hung askew, but the structure itself looked sound, and the setting was undeniably lovely, with a view of the mountains beyond the town. "It has potential," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Flynn's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "That's one way of putting it." He jumped down from the wagon and came around to help her descend. "Let's see the inside before you commit yourself." As Flynn was retrieving her satchel from the back of the wagon, a voice called out from the direction of the church. "Flynn Norwood. Didn't expect to see you in town until Saturday." A tall man with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed spectacles approached, his expression friendly but curious. "Thomas," Flynn greeted him, "had some business in Laramie." "So I see," the man replied, his gaze shifting to Tabitha with undisguised interest. "Thomas Bedford, this is Miss Tabitha Keller," Flynn introduced. "Miss Keller, Thomas runs the general store and heads the town council." Tabitha extended her hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Bedford. Likewise, Miss Keller." Thomas shook her hand firmly. "Forgive my surprise, but we weren't expecting anyone to answer our advertisement for a teacher so quickly." Before Tabitha could respond, Flynn smoothly intervened. "Miss Keller was already on her way to Laramie on other business when she saw your notice. When her plans changed, she decided to apply for the position. It wasn't precisely the story they had agreed upon, but it was close enough, and Tabitha nodded in confirmation. "Well, this is a stroke of luck for us," Thomas said, clearly pleased. "Our last teacher left rather suddenly to care for her mother back east. The children have been running wild for weeks." He studied Tabitha with a professional eye. "You have experience." "3 years teaching at the Mercer Street School for Girls in Philadelphia," Tabitha replied, grateful that this, at least, was completely true. Thomas's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Impressive. We're a far cry from a Philadelphia girls' school, mind you. Our students range from 6 to 16, boys and girls together, with varying levels of education." "I'm adaptable, Mr. Bedford," Tabitha assured him. "And I believe every child deserves a quality education, regardless of their circumstances." Her earnestness seemed to satisfy him. "The council will want to meet with you formally, of course, but speaking for myself, I think you'll do just fine." He gestured toward the cottage. "Were you planning to look at the accommodations?" "Yes," Flynn replied. "I was just about to show Miss Keller inside." "I have the key at the store," Thomas said. "Been keeping an eye on the place since Miss Wilson left. Let me fetch it for you." As Thomas hurried back toward the main street, Tabitha gave Flynn a grateful look. "Thank you for handling that so smoothly." Flynn shrugged. "Thomas is a good man, but he loves to talk. Best to give him a simple explanation that won't raise questions." Thomas returned promptly with a large iron key, which he handed to Tabitha with a flourish. "It's not the storehouse, I'm afraid, but it's served our teachers well enough over the years. The school pays for basic upkeep, and there's a small garden out back where you can grow vegetables if you've a mind to." "That's very generous," Tabitha said, genuinely touched by the consideration. "Not at all. Good teachers are hard to come by out here. We aim to keep them comfortable." Thomas glanced at the sky, which was beginning to darken with the approach of evening. "I should get back to the store before Agatha sends out a search party. Flynn can show you around, and if you need anything, just come by tomorrow. We're open from 7 to 6. After Thomas departed, Flynn carried Tabitha's satchel to the porch and waited while she unlocked the door. The interior was dim, with dust motes dancing in the shafts of late afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows. The main room was simply furnished with a small sofa, a rocking chair, a dining table with 2 chairs, and a cast-iron stove in the corner. A doorway led to what Tabitha assumed was the bedroom, and another smaller door likely opened to the lean-to kitchen Flynn had mentioned. "It needs a good cleaning," Flynn observed, running a finger through the dust on the table, "but the roof looks sound and the windows are all intact. That's something." Tabitha moved to open the shutters, letting in more light and fresh air. "It's perfect," she said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. After years in her uncle's house, where she had always been made to feel like an unwelcome guest, and the long journey west where she had no place to call her own, this small cottage represented freedom and possibility. Flynn watched her, a curious expression on his face. "You really mean that, don't you?" "Yes," she replied simply. "It's mine, or it will be, once I'm officially hired. A place where I make the rules and answer to no one but myself." Understanding dawned in Flynn's eyes. "Independence is a powerful thing." "Indeed it is." Tabitha moved toward the bedroom doorway, peering inside to find a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small washstand. "This will do nicely." Flynn remained in the main room, giving her privacy to explore. "I should be going," he said when she returned. "Got to get the wagon back to the livery and see to my own place. Been gone nearly 3 days now." Tabitha felt a sudden pang at the thought of his departure. As terrifying as the journey had been, there had been comfort in Flynn's steady presence. Now she would truly be on her own in this strange town. "Of course," she said, striving to keep her voice neutral. "You've already done more than enough, Mr. Norwood." Flynn's expression softened slightly. "It's still Flynn, you know, at least when it's just us." He hesitated, then added, "I live about 2 miles outside of town. If you need anything at all, just send word with one of the kids. They all know where my place is." "Thank you," Tabitha said, touched by his continued concern. "For everything." Flynn shifted uncomfortably under her gratitude. "I'll check on you in a few days, see how you're settling in." He tipped his hat and turned to go, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Tabitha, welcome to Chisholm Ranch." With that, he was gone, leaving Tabitha alone in her new home as the shadows lengthened across the floor. The reality of her situation suddenly hit her with full force. She was alone in a frontier town, hundreds of miles from anything familiar, about to embark on a completely new life. The enormity of it was both exhilarating and terrifying. But she was Tabitha Keller, who had defied her uncle and traveled across the country on nothing but hope and determination. She had survived a gunfight and outwitted men who would have sold her into a life of degradation. She could certainly handle a dusty cottage and a schoolroom full of frontier children. With renewed resolve, Tabitha rolled up her sleeves and set to work making her new home livable. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Tabitha threw herself into cleaning the cottage, scrubbing floors, washing windows, and beating dust from the sparse furnishings. The townspeople, curious about the new schoolteacher, began to stop by with small welcomes: a loaf of fresh bread from the baker's wife, a pot of jam from Mrs. Bedford, a handmade quilt from the church sewing circle. On her 3rd evening in Chisholm Ranch, Tabitha met with the town council in the church. The interview was more a formality than a genuine assessment, as the council members seemed predisposed to like her from the start. They asked about her teaching experience, her educational philosophy, and her plans for the upcoming term. Tabitha answered with confidence, outlining her belief in a structured yet nurturing approach to education. "And you're prepared to handle our more spirited students?" asked the blacksmith, a man named Samuel Johnson who served as the unofficial mayor. "Some of our ranch boys can be a handful, Mr. Johnson. I once taught 28 girls from Philadelphia's wealthiest families, each convinced that the rules didn't apply to her," Tabitha replied with a smile. "I believe I can manage a few high-spirited ranch boys." This drew appreciative laughter from the council members, and by the end of the meeting, Tabitha had been officially hired as the schoolteacher of Chisholm Ranch, with a salary of $40 per month plus her housing, a sum that, while modest, would allow her to live comfortably and even save a little. As the days passed, Tabitha began to feel more at home in the small town. She made a point of introducing herself to the parents of her future students, visiting the various shops and businesses, and attending Sunday services at the church. Everywhere she went, she was met with friendliness, though she was aware of the natural reserve with which frontier communities regarded newcomers. One thing puzzled her, however. Despite his promise to check on her, Flynn Norwood hadn't reappeared since leaving her at the cottage that first day. She had caught glimpses of him in town, once at the livery stable, another time emerging from the general store, but he seemed to deliberately avoid crossing her path. It was as if, having discharged his duty by delivering her safely to Chisholm Ranch, he considered their association at an end. This bothered Tabitha more than she cared to admit, even to herself. She told herself it was simply gratitude she felt, a natural desire to thank the man who had saved her from a terrible fate. But in the quiet evenings, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, she found her thoughts returning to Flynn with a persistence that suggested something deeper than mere gratitude. A week after her arrival, Tabitha was working in the small garden behind her cottage, attempting to clear the overgrown beds for a late planting of hardy vegetables, when a shadow fell across the ground beside her. She looked up to find Flynn standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. "Mr. Norwood," she said, startled. She rose quickly, brushing dirt from her apron. "I didn't hear you approach. Didn't mean to startle you," he replied. There was a guardedness to his manner that hadn't been present during their journey together. "Just wanted to see how you were settling in." "Very well, thank you." Tabitha gestured to the garden. "I'm attempting to revive this garden, though I fear it's a losing battle." Flynn surveyed the tangled mass of weeds and wild grasses. "Needs a good turning over. The soil underneath is rich enough." "So I've been told, but I confess my gardening experience is limited to windowsill herbs in Philadelphia." A faint smile touched Flynn's lips. "I could help if you'd like. Got some time tomorrow morning before I need to head back to my place." The offer surprised her. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," he said with a shrug. "Consider it a welcome gift." Tabitha studied him, trying to reconcile this awkward, almost shy man with the confident protector who had faced down armed pursuers without flinching. "Then I accept with gratitude." Flynn nodded, seemingly relieved to have completed his social obligation. "I'll come by after breakfast then." He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply added, "Good day, Miss Keller," and turned to leave. "Flynn," she called after him, the familiar address slipping out before she could consider it. He paused, looking back at her with a question in his eyes. "Thank you for checking on me." Something flickered across his face, a softening around the eyes, perhaps, or a slight easing of the tension in his shoulders. Then he nodded once more and continued on his way. Tabitha watched him go, wondering at the strange mix of emotions his brief visit had stirred within her. There was something about Flynn Norwood that intrigued her, a complexity beneath the taciturn exterior that made her want to know more. But he seemed determined to maintain a distance between them, and Tabitha was not one to push where she wasn't welcome. Still, as she returned to her gardening, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow morning with an anticipation that had little to do with the prospect of cleared garden beds. True to his word, Flynn appeared the next morning just as Tabitha was clearing away her breakfast dishes. He had brought tools, a spade, a hoe, and a rake, and set to work immediately, turning the soil with practiced efficiency while Tabitha watched, impressed by his strength and skill. "You're good at this," she observed as he paused to wipe his brow. The morning was cool, but the physical labor had brought a flush to his tanned face. "Grew up on a farm in Tennessee," he replied, resuming his digging. "Learned to work the soil before I learned to raid." It was the first personal detail Flynn had volunteered about his life before coming west, and Tabitha felt a small thrill at this crack in his reserve. "You don't speak like someone with a limited education," she noted. Flynn's rhythm with the spade didn't falter. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She taught me and my brothers at night after the field work was done." A shadow passed over his face. "She had great hopes for us." "She would be proud of what you've accomplished," Tabitha said softly. Flynn didn't respond immediately, focusing on his task with renewed intensity. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "She died in '62, typhoid, never saw what became of any of us." "I'm sorry," Tabitha said, recognizing the old grief in his tone. "Did your brothers come west with you?" "No." Flynn's expression closed, and Tabitha sensed she had pushed too far. "They didn't survive the war." Before she could respond, a young voice called from the front of the cottage. "Miss Keller, are you home?" Grateful for the interruption, Tabitha excused herself and went to find a boy of about 10 standing on her front porch, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "I'm Miss Keller," she confirmed. "And who might you be?" "Jack Bedford, madam," the boy replied, removing his cap. "Pa sent me to invite you to Sunday dinner tomorrow after church. Ma's making her special roast chicken." "That's very kind of your parents, Jack. Please tell them I would be delighted to accept." The boy nodded, then his eyes widened as Flynn appeared around the corner of the house, spade in hand. "Mr. Norwood, are you helping Miss Keller with her garden?" Flynn nodded curtly. "Morning, Jack. Pa says you make the best vegetable garden in the whole county," Jack continued, apparently oblivious to Flynn's discomfort at the attention. "Says your carrots won a blue ribbon at the county fair last summer." A reluctant smile tugged at Flynn's mouth. "Your pa exaggerates. But yes, I do all right with vegetables." "Then Miss Keller's garden is gonna be real fine," Jack declared with the absolute confidence of youth. He turned back to Tabitha. "I gotta go help Pa at the store. See you in church tomorrow, Miss Keller. Bye, Mr. Norwood." As the boy dashed away, Tabitha found herself smiling. "I didn't know I was receiving expert assistance," she teased gently. "Blue ribbons for carrots, no less." Flynn ducked his head, embarrassed. "Like I said, Thomas exaggerates. Still, I'm even more grateful for your help now." Tabitha gestured to the garden, where nearly half the beds had already been turned. "At this rate, I might actually have vegetables before winter." "It's not too late to plant certain crops," Flynn said, seeming relieved to return to a practical topic. "Turnips, spinach, some types of lettuce. They'll grow quick enough before the first hard frost." "I'll defer to your expertise," Tabitha said. "Perhaps you could advise me on what to plant." Flynn nodded, and they spent the rest of the morning working side by side. As the initial awkwardness faded, conversation flowed more easily between them. Flynn spoke of the climate and growing seasons in Colorado, while Tabitha shared stories of her teaching experiences in Philadelphia. Neither ventured again into the more personal territories that had caused tension earlier, but Tabitha felt a growing ease in Flynn's company that she hoped indicated the beginning of a friendship. By midday, the garden was completely turned, the soil dark and ready for planting. Flynn promised to return in a few days with seedlings from his own garden, an offer Tabitha gratefully accepted. "Thank you for your help," she said as Flynn gathered his tools to leave. "I couldn't have managed this on my own." "It was nothing," he demurred, but his expression suggested her gratitude pleased him. As he turned to go, Tabitha was struck by a sudden impulse. "Flynn," she called, using his first name deliberately. "Would you like to join me for the Bedford Sunday dinner tomorrow?" I'm sure they wouldn't mind another guest. The invitation clearly caught him off guard. "That's kind of you, but I don't think—" "Please," Tabitha interrupted, surprising herself with her persistence. "I would feel more comfortable with a familiar face present." Flynn studied her for a long moment, as if trying to discern her true motivation. Finally, he gave a small nod. "If you're sure the Bedfords won't mind." "They won't," Tabitha assured him, though in truth she had no way of knowing. "Thank you." As Flynn walked away, Tabitha wondered at her own actions. Why had she been so insistent on his company? The Bedfords seemed like perfectly lovely people, and as the new schoolteacher, she would need to build relationships with the families of her students. But there was something about Flynn Norwood that drew her a depth and complexity that intrigued her educator's mind. Or perhaps it was simpler than that. Perhaps it was just the fact that in a town full of strangers, he was the one person who knew her story who had, in fact, been instrumental in shaping it. Whatever the reason, Tabitha found herself looking forward to Sunday with an eagerness that had as much to do with Flynn's acceptance of her invitation as with the prospect of a home-cooked meal. Sunday dawned clear and bright, with the crispness in the air that heralded the approach of autumn. Tabitha dressed with care in her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinned her hair in a simple but elegant style. She had attended church services the previous Sunday, but had declined invitations afterward, feeling the need to establish herself in her own home before becoming too entangled in the social life of the town. The church was full when she arrived, and she noticed with interest the mix of people gathered for worship: ranching families in their Sunday best, shopkeepers and their wives, a few rough-looking men who might have been miners or cowboys, and even a small group of what appeared to be Mexican or Spanish families, sitting together near the back. Tabitha found a seat near the middle of the church, nodding politely to those around her. As the service was about to begin, she became aware of a slight stir at the back of the church and turned to see Flynn slipping into one of the rear pews. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement before focusing his attention on Reverend Michaels, who had taken his place at the pulpit. The service was simpler than those Tabitha was accustomed to in Philadelphia, but no less heartfelt. The congregation sang hymns with enthusiasm, if not always in tune, and the Reverend delivered a straightforward sermon on the parable of the Good Samaritan that Tabitha found both practical and touching. When the service concluded, there was the usual bustle as people greeted neighbors and friends. Agatha Bedford, a plump, energetic woman with a warm smile, made her way to Tabitha. "Miss Keller, I'm so glad you could join us for dinner today," she said, taking Tabitha's hands in her own. "Thomas speaks very highly of you, and the children are so excited to finally meet their new teacher." "Thank you for your kind invitation, Mrs. Bedford," Tabitha replied. "I'm looking forward to it." She hesitated, then added, "I hope you don't mind, but I've invited Mr. Norwood to join us as well. He's been very helpful with my garden, and I wanted to show my appreciation." A flicker of surprise crossed Agatha's face, quickly replaced by a polite smile. "Of course he's welcome. Flynn Norwood is respected in this community, though he doesn't socialize much." Before Tabitha could respond, Flynn appeared beside them, hat in hand. "Mrs. Bedford," he greeted Agatha with a nod. "Miss Keller tells me I'm invited to your table today. I hope that's not an imposition." "Not at all, Mr. Norwood," Agatha assured him, though Tabitha detected a certain reserve in her manner. "The more the merrier, as they say." The Bedford home was a comfortable two-story house just off the main street, painted white with green shutters and a well-tended garden. Inside, it was furnished in a style that spoke of modest prosperity and good taste, with a large dining table that could easily seat 10. Jack and his younger sister, Emma, a solemn-faced girl of about 8, watched Tabitha with undisguised curiosity as their mother bustled about, putting the finishing touches on dinner. Thomas Bedford emerged from what appeared to be his study, greeting Flynn with a hearty handshake and Tabitha with a warm smile. "We're delighted to have you both," he said, ushering them into the parlor while Agatha completed the meal preparations. "Flynn, it's been too long since you've graced our table." Flynn shifted uncomfortably. "Been busy with the ranch." "Always are, aren't you?" Thomas replied good-naturedly. "Well, it's good to see you in town 2 days in a row. Usually, we're lucky if we catch a glimpse of you once a week." As the conversation continued, Tabitha began to understand that Flynn's solitary nature was well known in Chisholm Ranch. He was respected, even liked, but held at a distance, or perhaps he held himself at a distance. She amended, noting the careful way he responded to Thomas's attempts at friendly conversation. When they were called to dinner, Tabitha found herself seated across from Flynn, with Jack to her right and Emma to her left. The meal was indeed special roast chicken with gravy, mashed potatoes, fresh bread and vegetables that Thomas proudly announced came from their own garden. As they ate, conversation flowed easily around the table. The Bedfords were curious about Tabitha's life in Philadelphia, and she found herself sharing stories of the city and her experiences as a teacher there. Flynn remained mostly silent, contributing only when directly addressed, but Tabitha noticed that his eyes rarely left her face as she spoke. "And what made you decide to come west, Miss Keller?" Agatha asked as she served apple pie for dessert. "It's quite a change from city life." Tabitha hesitated, aware of Flynn's sudden stillness across the table. "I was ready for a new challenge," she said carefully, sticking to the story they had agreed upon. "When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Chisholm Ranch, it seemed like an opportunity to make a difference in a growing community." "Well, we're certainly glad you did," Thomas said enthusiastically. "Our children need a proper education if this town is to prosper." "Speaking of education," Flynn said, surprising everyone by initiating a topic, "has the council considered my proposal about building a proper schoolhouse? The church serves well enough in good weather, but winter will be here before we know it." Thomas looked slightly uncomfortable. "We've discussed it, Flynn, but as I've told you before, the funds simply aren't there right now. Perhaps next year if the cattle prices hold." Flynn's jaw tightened, but he nodded in apparent acceptance. Tabitha, sensing an undercurrent of tension, turned to the children to ask about their previous schooling experiences, effectively changing the subject. After dinner, while Agatha and the children cleared the table, Thomas invited Flynn to his study to discuss some town business. Left alone in the parlor, Tabitha wandered to the bookcase that occupied one wall, scanning the titles with interest. "He's sweet on you, you know," a voice said from behind her. Tabitha turned to find Agatha standing in the doorway, a knowing look on her face. "I beg your pardon," Tabitha said, genuinely confused. "Flynn Norwood," Agatha clarified, entering the room and lowering her voice. "I've known that man for 6 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, like you're a puzzle he's trying to solve." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Bedford, I assure you—" "Oh, there's no need to be embarrassed, dear," Agatha interrupted with a wave of her hand. "Flynn is a good man, one of the best in these parts, despite his preference for solitude. Any woman would be lucky to catch his eye." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "But he carries burdens, that one. Burdens he won't share, even with those who call him friend." "We're barely acquainted," Tabitha protested, though even to her own ears, the words rang false. The intense days of their journey together had created a bond that defied the brevity of their acquaintance. Agatha studied her with shrewd eyes. "Perhaps, but I've never known Flynn to attend a social dinner, or help anyone with their garden, or speak up about the schoolhouse unless directly asked." She smiled kindly. "Just something to consider, my dear." Before Tabitha could formulate a response, Thomas and Flynn returned from the study. Flynn's expression was tight, suggesting the conversation hadn't gone entirely to his satisfaction, but he managed a polite smile for Agatha. "Thank you for a wonderful meal, Mrs. Bedford," he said. "But I should be heading back to my ranch. Got chores waiting." "Of course, Mr. Norwood," Agatha replied. "You're welcome any time." Flynn turned to Tabitha. "Would you like me to walk you home, Miss Keller?" Though the cottage was barely 5 minutes away and the afternoon was still bright, Tabitha found herself nodding. "That would be very kind, Thank you." After expressing their gratitude to the Bedfords, Tabitha and Flynn set out for her cottage. They walked in silence for a few moments before Tabitha asked, "What was that about a schoolhouse?" Flynn sighed, adjusting his hat against the sun's glare. "I've been trying to convince the council for 2 years that we need a proper school building. The church is fine for now, but it's dark inside, even with the windows, and in winter it's cold. Can't keep a fire going all day because of the smoke." He glanced at her. "Not ideal conditions for learning." "No, they're not," Tabitha agreed, impressed by his concern. But Mr. Bedford seemed to think funds were an issue. "They always say that," Flynn said, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. "But they found money quick enough to build that new saloon last year." Tabitha raised an eyebrow. "You think education should be a priority over entertainment, don't you?" Flynn countered. "Of course," she replied. "I'm just surprised to hear a rancher express such a strong opinion on the matter." Flynn was quiet for a moment, then said, "My mother believed that education was the only way to truly better oneself. That knowledge was the one thing no one could take from you." He kicked at a stone on the path. She was right. Again, Tabitha glimpsed that deeper current running beneath Flynn's taciturn exterior, a thoughtfulness and depth of feeling that belied his rough appearance. They reached her cottage too soon, and Flynn paused at the gate to her small yard. "Well, Miss Keller, I'll leave you here." "Thank you for accompanying me to dinner," Tabitha said, "and for walking me home." Flynn nodded, his eyes briefly meeting hers before skittering away. It was no trouble. As he turned to go, Tabitha recalled Agatha Bedford's words. Was it possible that this self-contained, solitary man harbored feelings for her? And more unsettlingly, why did the thought send a flutter of excitement through her chest? "Flynn," she called impulsively. He paused, looking back at her. "You mentioned bringing some seedlings for the garden. When might I expect you?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Tomorrow afternoon, if that suits you, after your school council meeting." "That would be perfect," Tabitha said, returning his smile. "I'll look forward to it." As Flynn walked away, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun, Tabitha couldn't help but wonder at the strange turns her life had taken in the past 2 weeks. She had left Philadelphia expecting to marry a man she'd never met, only to find herself teaching in a frontier town, and increasingly drawn to a solitary rancher with shadows in his eyes. What would tomorrow bring? For the first time in a long while, Tabitha felt a sense of anticipation rather than dread at the question. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Tabitha prepared for the start of the school term. She met with parents, organized curriculum, and familiarized herself with the church that would serve as her classroom. The town council had provided basic supplies: chalk, slates, a few precious textbooks, but Tabitha quickly realized she would need to be creative to meet the diverse educational needs of her students, who ranged from complete beginners to those ready for advanced studies. Throughout this busy time, Flynn became a regular presence in her life. True to his word, he had brought seedlings for her garden, and he stopped by every few days to check on their progress or help with some small task around the cottage. Their conversations grew easier, more natural, though Flynn still maintained a certain reserve, particularly when the topic turned to his past. The school term began in early October, with 22 students ranging in age from 6 to 16 filling the pews of the church. Tabitha quickly established a routine, dividing the children into groups based on their abilities, and setting up a system where older students helped younger ones with basic skills while she focused on more advanced instruction. To her surprise, Flynn appeared at the church door one afternoon as classes were dismissing. He stood awkwardly to one side as the children streamed past, a few of the older boys greeting him by name. "Flynn," Tabitha said, pleased by his unexpected visit. "What brings you to town in the middle of the week?" "Had business at the bank," he replied, stepping inside once the last child had left. He glanced around the church, taking in the makeshift classroom arrangements. "How's it going?" "Well enough," Tabitha said, gathering papers from the lectern that served as her desk. "The children are eager to learn, though the conditions are challenging." Flynn's jaw tightened. "It's not right trying to teach in here. The light's poor and the seats weren't designed for writing." He moved to one of the pews, running a hand along the worn wood. "Children deserve better." "Yes, they do," Tabitha agreed softly, "but we make do with what we have." Flynn turned to face her, an intensity in his expression that made her breath catch. "It doesn't have to be this way, you know. I've got good land, just outside of town. I'd donate it for a proper schoolhouse." Tabitha stared at him, stunned by the offer. "Flynn, that's incredibly generous, but the council has made it clear there are no funds for construction." "I've been saving," he said, the words coming quickly now as if he'd rehearsed them. "Got a fair amount set aside. Enough to get the building started, at least, if the townspeople pitched in with labor and maybe a few materials. You'd spend your savings on a schoolhouse?" Tabitha asked, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what he was suggesting. Flynn shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "What else am I saving for? Got no family to leave it to." He met her gaze directly. "Education matters, Tabitha. You know that better than anyone." In that moment, looking into Flynn's earnest blue eyes, Tabitha felt something shift inside her, a deepening of the admiration and attraction that had been growing since their first meeting. This man, who presented such a rough exterior to the world, possessed a generosity of spirit and a commitment to principles that took her breath away. "Flynn," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. "I don't know what to." The church door swung open, interrupting her. Thomas Bedford stood in the entrance, his expression darkening slightly at the sight of Flynn and Tabitha alone together. "Miss Keller, Mr. Norwood," he greeted them with forced joviality. "I was just coming to see if you needed any supplies for tomorrow's lessons, but I see you have company." "Mr. Bedford," Tabitha acknowledged, struggling to regain her composure. "Mr. Norwood was just discussing educational matters with me." Was he indeed? Thomas's tone was light, but his eyes were sharp as they moved between the two of them. "Well, don't let me interrupt. I'll come back another time." After Thomas departed, a strained silence fell between Tabitha and Flynn. The moment of connection had been broken, replaced by an awkward awareness of how their private conversation might have appeared to others. "I should go," Flynn said finally, reaching for his hat. "Got work waiting at the ranch." "Of course," Tabitha replied, disappointed but understanding. "Thank you for stopping by and for your generous offer. I'll give it some thought." Flynn nodded, his expression once again carefully neutral. "Take care, Miss Keller." As he left, Tabitha sank onto one of the pews, her mind whirling. Flynn's offer was extraordinary, a testament to his character and his values, but it also raised questions about his motives. Was this gesture purely about education, or was there something more personal driving it? And if so, how did she feel about that? Agatha Bedford's words echoed in her mind. "He's sweet on you, you know." Could it be true? And if it was, what would she do about it? These questions followed Tabitha home, lingering as she prepared her simple evening meal and reviewed lesson plans for the following day. By the time she retired for the night, she had reached no conclusions, but one thing was certain. Flynn Norwood had become far more important to her than she had ever anticipated. The weeks turned into months, and autumn gave way to winter. Chisholm Ranch received its first snow in mid-November, transforming the town into a picturesque scene that reminded Tabitha of a Christmas card. The cottage proved snug and warm, thanks in large part to Flynn's efforts to weatherproof it before the cold set in. Flynn's proposal about the schoolhouse had gained unexpected traction in the community. After Tabitha had cautiously mentioned it to a few influential parents, word had spread, and soon a committee had formed to explore the possibility. Flynn had formally offered the land at a town council meeting, and to Tabitha's surprise, his offer had been accepted with enthusiasm. Plans were drawn up for a simple but sturdy building that would be constructed in the spring. As Christmas approached, the town buzzed with preparations for the holiday. The children were rehearsing a pageant to be performed on Christmas Eve, and Tabitha found herself caught up in the excitement, helping with costumes and coaching young performers. One afternoon, as she was walking home from the general store with supplies for the pageant, she spotted Flynn's wagon outside the blacksmith shop. Without consciously deciding to do so, she found herself crossing the street toward it. Flynn emerged from the shop just as she approached, his face lighting up with a rare, unguarded smile when he saw her. "Tabitha," he greeted her, dropping the formality they still maintained in public. "In town for supplies." "For the Christmas pageant," she confirmed, holding up her purchases. "The children are very excited." "As they should be," Flynn said. "First Christmas pageant Chisholm Ranch has had in years." He hesitated, then asked, "Do you have plans for Christmas dinner?" Tabitha shook her head. "Not specifically. The Bedfords have invited me, but I haven't given them an answer yet." Flynn cleared his throat. "I was thinking, that is, if you don't have other plans." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I'd like to invite you to my ranch for Christmas dinner. Nothing fancy, but I make a decent roast, and the place looks nice with a bit of greenery." The invitation caught Tabitha off guard. In all the months she had known Flynn, he had never invited her to his home. Their interactions had always taken place in town or at her cottage. "I'd be delighted," she said, surprised by how true the words felt. "What time should I arrive?" Relief washed over Flynn's face. "I'll come fetch you around noon if that suits you. The ranch is a bit out of the way." "That sounds perfect," Tabitha agreed. "I look forward to seeing your home." Flynn's smile widened, transforming his usually serious face. "It's nothing grand, but it's mine. Built most of it with my own hands." A shout from across the street interrupted their conversation, one of Tabitha's students calling a greeting. She waved back, then turned to Flynn. "I should be going. The children are waiting for these supplies." "Of course," Flynn nodded. "I'll see you at the pageant, if not before." As Tabitha continued on her way, she found herself filled with a warm anticipation at the prospect of spending Christmas at Flynn's ranch. Their friendship had deepened over the past months, evolving into something that defied easy categorization. They weren't exactly courting. Flynn had made no formal declarations, and Tabitha had maintained a careful professional distance, as befitted her position as the town's teacher. Yet there was an undeniable connection between them, a mutual understanding and respect that felt increasingly like something more. The Christmas Eve pageant was a resounding success. The church was filled to capacity, with even the most remote ranching families having made the journey into town for the occasion. The children performed admirably, reciting their lines with only a few minor mishaps that drew indulgent laughter from the audience. Afterward, as the townspeople mingled and exchanged holiday greetings, Tabitha found herself surrounded by parents expressing their gratitude for her work with the children. She accepted their praise graciously, all the while scanning the crowd for Flynn. She had seen him sitting at the back of the church during the performance, but had lost sight of him in the post-pageant bustle. Finally, as the crowd began to thin, she spotted him near the door, deep in conversation with Samuel Johnson, the blacksmith. As if sensing her gaze, Flynn looked up, his eyes finding hers across the room. He excused himself from Samuel and made his way to her side. "The children did you proud," he said by way of greeting. "Especially young Emma Bedford. She has quite the memory for Shakespeare." Tabitha smiled, pleased that he had noticed. Emma had recited a passage from A Midsummer Night's Dream as part of the program, a last-minute addition that Tabitha had suggested to showcase the girl's natural talent for language. "She's a remarkable child," Tabitha agreed. "I'm hoping to nurture her interest in literature." Flynn nodded approvingly. "You're making a difference here, you know. The children talk about you all the time, even the older boys who pretend they're too grown for school." The simple compliment meant more to Tabitha than all the effusive praise she had received from parents. Flynn was not a man given to flattery. When he spoke, he meant what he said. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a great deal coming from you." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Tabitha felt as if the crowded church had disappeared, leaving just the two of them in a bubble of shared understanding. Then someone called her name, breaking the spell. "I should be going," Flynn said, taking a step back. "Early start tomorrow with the chores, even on Christmas." "Of course," Tabitha nodded. "I'll see you at noon." "At noon," Flynn confirmed. He hesitated, then added, "Merry Christmas, Tabitha." "Merry Christmas, Flynn," she replied, watching as he slipped out into the snowy night. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, with sunlight glittering on the fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Tabitha woke early, filled with a childlike excitement that she hadn't experienced in years. She dressed with care in her best dress, the blue one she had worn to her first Sunday dinner at the Bedfords, now adorned with a white lace collar that Martha Black had given her as an early Christmas gift. She had prepared a modest gift for Flynn, a hand-knitted scarf in a deep green wool that she had worked on during the evenings, and a small book of poetry by Robert Frost that she had ordered from Denver. It wasn't much, but she hoped it would please him. At precisely noon, the sound of horse hooves outside announced Flynn's arrival. Tabitha gathered her shawl and the wrapped gifts, taking a last glance in the mirror before opening the door. Flynn stood on her porch, hat in hand, dressed in what she recognized as his Sunday best clean dark trousers, a pressed white shirt, and a vest that looked relatively new. His usually unruly hair had been carefully combed, and he had trimmed his beard, making him look younger and somehow more vulnerable. "Merry Christmas," he said, his eyes taking in her appearance with obvious appreciation. "You look beautiful." The direct compliment brought a blush to Tabitha's cheeks. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." Flynn's ears reddened, but he smiled, offering his arm to escort her to the waiting wagon. The vehicle had been swept clean of snow, and thick blankets were arranged on the seat for warmth. As they set off through town, several people called out holiday greetings, their eyes lingering curiously on the pair. Tabitha knew there would be talk the schoolteacher spending Christmas Day alone with the bachelor rancher, but found she didn't care. She was tired of living her life according to others' expectations. Once they left town, Flynn guided the horses onto a well-maintained trail that wound through snow-covered hills. The landscape was breathtaking in its winter beauty, pristine white fields broken only by stands of pine trees and the occasional rocky outcropping. "It's beautiful out here," Tabitha said, drawing the blanket closer against the cold. "It is," Flynn agreed. "Especially after a fresh snow. Makes everything look clean and new." He glanced at her. "Sorry about the cold. It's not a long ride, but if you get too chilled, there's a heated brick wrapped in cloth under the blanket for your feet." Tabitha smiled at his thoughtfulness. "I'm fine for now, thank you." They rode in comfortable silence for a time, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves in the snow. Finally, Flynn pointed ahead to where a curl of smoke rose against the clear sky. "My place," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "Not much to look at, but it's home." As they drew closer, Tabitha could make out a sturdy log cabin nestled in a small valley, protected from the wind by surrounding hills. Behind it stood a large barn and several smaller outbuildings. A corral adjoined the barn where several horses moved about, their breath creating puffs of steam in the cold air. Flynn helped her down from the wagon and led her toward the cabin, pausing at the door. "I should warn you," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "It's a bachelor's home." "Simple and plain." "Flynn," Tabitha said gently, "I'm honored that you've invited me. I don't care how fancy it is or isn't." He searched her face for a moment, then nodded, seemingly reassured, and opened the door. The interior of the cabin was indeed simple, but far from plain. The main room was warm and inviting, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. The furniture was sturdy and well-crafted, a table with 4 chairs, a comfortable-looking armchair near the fire, and bookshelves that, to Tabitha's surprise, were filled with volumes. Evergreen boughs decorated the mantel, filling the room with their fresh scent, and a small tree stood in one corner, adorned with simple ornaments that looked handmade. The overall effect was one of comfort and care, a home that reflected its owner's character, unpretentious but solid, with unexpected touches of refinement. "Flynn, it's lovely," Tabitha said sincerely, turning to take it all in. Flynn ducked his head, pleased but embarrassed by her approval. "Kitchen's through there," he said, gesturing to a doorway. "And there's another room in back that I use as a study." He took her shawl, hanging it carefully on a peg by the door. "Please make yourself comfortable. Dinner won't be ready for a bit yet." As Flynn bustled about in the kitchen, Tabitha explored the main room, drawn irresistibly to the bookshelves. The collection was eclectic histories, novels, poetry, and practical volumes on farming and ranching. Many showed signs of frequent reading, with cracked spines and dog-eared pages. "You have more books than most people in town," she observed when Flynn returned with 2 cups of hot cider. "Reading passes the winter evenings," he replied, handing her a cup. "Not much else to do out here when the snow's deep." "These aren't just practical books, though," Tabitha noted, running her finger along the spine of a volume of Shakespeare. "You enjoy literature." Flynn shrugged, but there was a hint of pride in his expression. "My mother taught me to value all kinds of knowledge, not just what's immediately useful." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Tabitha said softly. "She was," Flynn agreed, his eyes distant with memory. Then, shaking himself back to the present, he gestured to the table. "Dinner's almost ready, if you'd like to sit." The meal was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, and vegetables from Flynn's root cellar, followed by an apple pie that he admitted sheepishly had been baked by Martha Black. They ate slowly, savoring both the food and the conversation, which flowed more easily than ever before. Flynn spoke of his plans for the ranch in the coming year, while Tabitha shared stories of her students' progress and her hopes for the new schoolhouse. As they finished their pie, Flynn seemed to grow nervous again, fidgeting with his napkin in a way that was uncharacteristic of his usual composure. "I have something for you," he finally said, rising from the table. "A Christmas gift. It's not much, but—" He trailed off, disappearing into the back room and returning with a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "I have something for you as well," Tabitha said, retrieving her gifts from where she had placed them near the door. They exchanged packages somewhat awkwardly, each insisting the other open theirs first. Finally, Flynn carefully unwrapped the book and scarf, his expression softening as he examined them. "Frost," he said, running his fingers over the book's cover. "I've read some of his work in journals but never owned a collection." "I thought you might enjoy it," Tabitha said. "And the scarf? Well, winters are cold here." Flynn wrapped the scarf around his neck, the deep green bringing out the blue of his eyes. "It's perfect," he said simply. "Thank you, Tabitha." "You're welcome," she replied, warmed by his genuine pleasure. "Now may I open mine?" Flynn nodded, watching intently as she unwrapped the package to reveal a small wooden box, exquisitely carved with a pattern of leaves and flowers. When she opened it, a soft melody began to play a music box. "Flynn," she breathed, enchanted by the gift. "It's beautiful." "I made the box," he explained, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice. "The music mechanism I ordered from Denver. It's a folk song my mother used to sing, about a girl named Barbara Allen." Tabitha was speechless, touched beyond measure by the thought and care that had gone into the gift. The box itself was a work of art, the carving intricate and precise. That Flynn had made it with his own hands made it infinitely more precious than any store-bought present. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed, looking up at him with tears pricking at her eyes. "This is the most thoughtful gift I've ever received." Flynn's expression was a mixture of relief and something deeper, more intense. "I'm glad you like it," he said softly. Their eyes held, and Tabitha felt that same connection she had experienced in the church, a sense of understanding and rightness that transcended words. Without conscious thought, she rose from her chair and moved toward him. Flynn stood as well, and suddenly they were mere inches apart, the music box still playing its sweet melody between them. "Tabitha," Flynn murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm not good with words, but I need to tell you, these past months having you in my life, it's meant everything to me." Tabitha's heart pounded in her chest. "It's meant everything to me too, Flynn." Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Flynn raised a hand to her cheek, his touch as light as a whisper. "I never expected to find someone like you. Never thought I'd feel this way again, or maybe ever." "Like what?" Tabitha asked, needing to hear the words. Flynn took a deep breath. "Like I've found the missing piece of myself. Like everything makes sense when you're near. Like—" He paused, struggling for the right words. "Like I'm falling in love with you, Tabitha Keller, and I don't know how to stop, don't want to stop." The declaration, so honest and unadorned, pierced Tabitha to her core. This man who had saved her life, who had helped her build a new one, who had shown his character through actions rather than empty promises, was offering her his heart. "Flynn," she whispered, covering his hand with her own. "I feel the same way. I've been falling in love with you since the moment you told me I wasn't leaving with anyone but you." A smile broke across Flynn's face, transforming it with joy. "May I kiss you, Tabitha?" "Please," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with growing passion as she responded in kind. The kiss was everything Tabitha had dreamed it might be, tender yet powerful, an affirmation of the feelings that had been building between them for months. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since Laramie," he confessed. Tabitha laughed softly. "Even while we were being chased by Wells' men." "Especially then," Flynn replied, his arms tightening around her waist. "You were so brave, Tabitha. So determined. I think I started falling for you right then and there." They moved to sit by the fire, Flynn's arm around Tabitha's shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him. The music box had stopped playing, but its melody lingered in the air, a soundtrack to this new chapter in their lives. "What happens now?" Tabitha asked after a comfortable silence. Flynn kissed her temple. Now I court you properly if you'll allow it, and in time if you're willing." He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I'd like to make you my wife, Tabitha. Not today, not tomorrow, but when you're ready. When we're both ready." Tabitha lifted her head to look at him, her heart full to bursting with the love she felt for this remarkable man. "I'd like that very much." Flynn Norwood. As the winter afternoon faded into evening, they remained by the fire, talking of the future they would build together, just as surely as the new schoolhouse would rise in spring. A future neither had imagined when Tabitha first stepped off that train in Laramie, packed for a man she'd never met, only to find her destiny in the eyes of a cowboy who had vowed she wouldn't leave with anyone but him. Spring came early to Chisholm Ranch that year, with the snow melting by late February and the first green shoots appearing in March. Construction on the new schoolhouse began as soon as the ground had thawed enough for digging foundations, with nearly every man in town volunteering labor on weekends. Flynn was there every day he could spare from his ranch duties, often staying late into the evening to complete one more task. Tabitha and Flynn's courtship had proceeded at a measured pace through the winter months, with Flynn coming into town 2 or 3 times a week for dinner at her cottage, or to escort her to community events. They were discreet, but not secretive, aware that their relationship was the subject of much good-natured gossip in the small town. By April, the schoolhouse was taking shape, a simple but spacious building with large windows to let in light, a proper wood stove for heating, and real desks that Flynn had ordered from Denver at his own expense. Tabitha watched its progress with growing excitement, envisioning the improved learning environment for her students. One warm Saturday in late April, Flynn invited Tabitha to his ranch for dinner, as had become their custom every few weeks. When he arrived to collect her, however, he seemed unusually nervous, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a restless energy that had Tabitha raising a curious eyebrow. "Is everything all right?" she asked as they set out in the wagon. "Fine," Flynn replied too quickly. "Just got some things on my mind." Tabitha let it go, suspecting that whatever was bothering him would be revealed in time. The countryside was beautiful in its spring glory, with wildflowers dotting the green meadows and new leaves budding on the aspens. As they approached Flynn's ranch, Tabitha noticed that the place looked even more well-kept than usual, with fresh paint on the barn and new flowers planted along the path to the cabin door. Inside, the table was set with what she recognized as Flynn's best dishes, the ones he normally reserved for special occasions. A vase of wildflowers sat at the center, and candles were arranged nearby, ready to be lit as the evening progressed. "Flynn," Tabitha said, taking in the preparations. "What's the occasion?" Flynn cleared his throat, his nervous energy even more pronounced. "I thought we might celebrate. The schoolhouse is nearly finished. Your first year of teaching here is coming to a close. Seems worth marking." Tabitha accepted this explanation, though she suspected there was more to it. They settled into their usual routine, Flynn cooking while Tabitha set the table and arranged the flowers. Dinner was delicious as always, but Flynn ate little, pushing food around his plate and responding distractedly to Tabitha's attempts at conversation. Finally, as they were finishing dessert, Tabitha placed her hand over his. "Flynn, please tell me what's bothering you. You've barely spoken all evening." Flynn met her gaze, his blue eyes filled with a mix of emotions, nervousness, hope, and something that looked very much like fear. "Nothing's bothering me exactly, it's just..." He took a deep breath. "I had a plan for how to do this, but I'm making a mess of it." "Do what?" Tabitha asked gently. Flynn pushed back from the table and, to Tabitha's astonishment, dropped to one knee beside her chair. From his pocket, he withdrew a small box. "Tabitha Keller," he began, his voice steadier now. "I've loved you since that day in Laramie, though I didn't know it then. You've brought joy and purpose to my life that I never thought I'd find. This past year has been the happiest of my life, and I can't imagine a future without you in it." He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring with a small diamond. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Though Tabitha had anticipated this moment would come eventually, the reality of it, Flynn kneeling before her, offering his heart and his future, filled her with overwhelming emotion. Tears sprang to her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Flynn," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Joy broke across Flynn's face like sunrise, and he slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. Then he rose, pulling her to her feet and into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that conveyed all the love and promise of their future together. When they finally parted, Flynn rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "I've been carrying that ring around for weeks, waiting for the right time," he confessed. "Nearly asked you a dozen times." Tabitha laughed softly, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "And what made today the right time?" Flynn opened his eyes, his expression growing more serious. "I received a letter yesterday from Jonathan Wells." Tabitha stiffened in his arms. "Wells, what did he want? To threaten us?" Flynn said grimly. "He's still angry about what happened in Laramie. Says he hasn't forgotten, and neither have his men." Fear flickered through Tabitha. "Do you think he would come here, to Chisholm Ranch?" Flynn shook his head. "Not likely. Wells operates in the shadows, not in established towns where he might face real law. But his letter made me realize something." His arms tightened around her. "Life is uncertain, Tabitha, especially out here. I don't want to waste another day not being your husband, not when I've been sure of my feelings for so long." Tabitha studied his face, seeing the sincerity and love written plainly there. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "When should we marry?" "As soon as you're willing," Flynn replied promptly. "The school term ends in June, perhaps after that. Unless you'd prefer to wait longer, June would be perfect," Tabitha interrupted, her heart swelling with happiness. "After the term ends, but before the summer heat." Flynn's smile returned, brilliant with joy. "June it is, then." They spent the remainder of the evening discussing their plans, a simple ceremony at the church, followed by a celebration that would include the entire town. Tabitha would continue teaching, of course, but would move to the ranch with Flynn. The cottage in town could be used for the next teacher, or perhaps as additional space for special classes. "I was thinking," Flynn said as they sat by the fire, Tabitha's head resting on his shoulder, "that the upstairs room in the schoolhouse could be used for a library. We could start collecting books, maybe even order some from back east." "That's a wonderful idea," Tabitha enthused. "The children have so little access to books beyond what I can provide. And we could expand the school as the town grows," Flynn continued, warming to the subject. "Add more rooms, hire another teacher." Tabitha lifted her head to look at him, struck by his use of we. "You've thought about this a lot, haven't you?" Flynn nodded, a hint of self-consciousness in his expression. "Education changed my life, Tabitha. Gave me choices I wouldn't have had otherwise. I want that for every child in Chisholm Ranch and for our own children someday." The mention of children sent a warm flutter through Tabitha's chest. The idea of building a family with Flynn, of raising sons and daughters in this beautiful, wild country, filled her with a deep sense of rightness. "Our children will be very fortunate," she said softly, "to have such a father." Flynn's eyes darkened with emotion, and he pulled her close for another kiss, a kiss that spoke of the future they would build together, of the love that had brought them to this moment, against all odds. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Chisholm Ranch, met with general approval and good wishes. The date was set for the third Saturday in June, and preparations began in earnest. Agatha Bedford took charge of organizing the celebration, while Reverend Michaels counseled them on the ceremony itself. As the school term drew to a close, Tabitha found herself increasingly busy with end-of-year assessments and the logistics of moving her belongings to Flynn's ranch. Flynn, meanwhile, was adding a room to his cabin, a study for Tabitha, lined with bookshelves and featuring a large window that looked out over the valley. The new schoolhouse was completed just in time for the closing ceremony of the term, a proud achievement for the entire community. As Tabitha stood on the steps of the building, watching her students receive their certificates of achievement, she caught Flynn's eye in the crowd of parents and townspeople. His smile, filled with pride and love, reminded her again of how fortunate she was to have found him. 2 weeks before the wedding, an unexpected visitor arrived in Chisholm Ranch. Tabitha was in the schoolhouse, organizing materials for the following term when a shadow fell across the doorway. Looking up, she was startled to see a young woman she didn't recognize, slender, blonde, and fashionably dressed, with an air of city sophistication that stood out starkly in the frontier town. "Miss Keller?" the woman inquired, her voice cultured but hesitant. "Yes," Tabitha confirmed, rising from her desk. "Can I help you?" The woman stepped into the schoolhouse, glancing around with evident curiosity. "My name is Lily Carter, Mrs. Lily Carter now. I believe you know my husband's shop in Denver." Realization dawned on Tabitha. "You're the girl Flynn helped escape from Jonathan Wells." Lily nodded, a shadow passing over her pretty face at the mention of Wells' name. "Flynn saved my life, and not just mine. When I heard he was getting married, I had to come and meet the woman who had captured his heart." She smiled softly. "He deserves happiness more than anyone I know." "How did you hear about our engagement?" Tabitha asked, gesturing for Lily to take a seat. "Flynn writes to me occasionally, checking that I'm safe and well," Lily explained. "His last letter mentioned he was to be married." "I hope you don't mind my coming unannounced. My husband is attending to business in town, and I thought I might surprise Flynn and meet you, of course." "I'm glad you did," Tabitha said sincerely. "Flynn speaks of you with great affection. I know your well-being means a lot to him." Lily's eyes grew misty. "He's a remarkable man. For a long time, I thought he might never allow himself to love anyone, not after what happened to his family." Tabitha stilled, her attention sharpening. "His family? He's mentioned losing them but never explained how." A look of confusion crossed Lily's face. "He hasn't told you about Sarah, about what Wells did?" "No," Tabitha said slowly, a sense of dread building in her stomach. "What are you talking about, Mrs. Carter?" Lily bit her lip, clearly distressed. "Oh dear, I've spoken out of turn. I assumed he would have shared this with you, being his fiancé." "Please," Tabitha urged gently, "tell me what you know. Flynn carries so many burdens alone. Perhaps understanding this one might help me share it with him." After a moment's hesitation, Lily nodded. "Flynn had a wife before Sarah. They lived in a small mining camp near Silver Creek about 10 years ago. Flynn was working as a scout for the mining company, and Sarah taught the miners' children, much as you do here." Tabitha's breath caught. Flynn had been married before. He had never mentioned a wife, though that explained his interest in education, his determination to build a proper schoolhouse. "What happened to her?" Tabitha asked, though part of her feared the answer. Lily's expression grew grave. "Jonathan Wells happened. He came to Silver Creek with his usual scheme, promising respectable employment to young women back east, then forcing them into prostitution once they arrived. Sarah discovered what he was doing and tried to help one of the girls escape. Wells found out. She paused, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. He had his men burn their cabin while Sarah was inside. Flynn was away, guiding a group of surveyors, by the time he returned. "Oh, Flynn," Tabitha breathed, her heart breaking for the man she loved. No wonder he had dedicated himself to thwarting Wells, to saving women from his clutches. No wonder he lived such a solitary life, until she had come along. "When Flynn found me in that mining camp 3 years ago, I thought I saw recognition in his eyes," Lily continued. "Not of me personally, but of my situation. He understood my fear, my desperation, in a way no one else could. That's why he risked so much to help me and the others." Before Tabitha could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps made them both look toward the door. Flynn appeared in the entrance, his expression shifting from surprise to concern as he took in the scene before him. "Lily," he said, clearly shocked to see her. "What are you doing in Chisholm Ranch?" Lily rose, crossing to Flynn and embracing him warmly. "I came to congratulate you, you silly man. And to meet this wonderful woman who's finally convinced you to open your heart again." Flynn returned the embrace awkwardly, his eyes finding Tabitha's over Lily's shoulder. Something in her expression must have alerted him, for his face paled slightly. "What have you two been discussing?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral as Lily stepped back. "I should find my husband," Lily said diplomatically, sensing the tension. "He'll be wondering where I've gone. We're staying at the Ponderosa Inn for the night if you'd like to join us for dinner, both of you." After Lily had departed, a heavy silence fell between Tabitha and Flynn. Finally, Flynn moved further into the room, removing his hat and turning it restlessly in his hands. "She told you about Sarah," he said. "It wasn't a question." Tabitha nodded. "She thought I already knew." Flynn's jaw tightened. "I should have told you myself. I wanted to many times, but—" He trailed off, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the schoolhouse walls. But the pain was too great. Tabitha finished for him, rising from her chair and crossing to where he stood. "Flynn, I understand why you couldn't speak of it. Some wounds run too deep for words." Flynn's eyes, when they finally met hers, were filled with a mixture of grief and apprehension. "Does it change things between us, knowing I was married before?" "Of course not," Tabitha said firmly, taking his hands in hers. "Nothing could change my love for you, Flynn Norwood. Nothing." Relief washed over his features, followed by a vulnerability that Tabitha had rarely seen in him. "I loved Sarah," he said quietly. "She was my first love, the one who taught me it was possible to build a life with someone, to trust and be trusted. When I lost her—" He took a shuddering breath. "I thought that part of me had died with her. I never imagined I could feel this way again until I met you." Tabitha squeezed his hands, her own eyes filling with tears at the raw honesty in his voice. "You don't have to choose between your love for her and your love for me, Flynn. The heart has room for both." "You're remarkable, Tabitha Keller," Flynn said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't deserve you." "You deserve every happiness," Tabitha countered, rising on tiptoe to press a gentle kiss to his lips. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life ensuring you have it." That evening they joined Lily and her husband, James, for dinner at the Ponderosa Inn. The conversation flowed easily, with stories of Denver, of Flynn's rescue operation, and of Lily and James's young son, who had been named Flynn in honor of the man who had saved his mother. As they walked back to Tabitha's cottage afterward, Flynn seemed lighter somehow, as if sharing the burden of his past had freed him in some way. Standing on her porch in the soft June twilight, he took both her hands in his. "No more secrets," he promised. "From now on, you know everything there is to know about Flynn Norwood, the good and the bad. I look forward to learning more every day for the rest of our lives." Tabitha replied, her heart full of love for this complex, honorable man who had chosen her to share his future. 2 weeks later, on a perfect June day, Tabitha Keller became Tabitha Norwood in a ceremony that brought together the entire community of Chisholm Ranch. The church was decorated with wildflowers, and Tabitha wore a simple white dress that Martha Black had helped her sew. Flynn, standing at the altar in a new suit, watched with undisguised awe as Tabitha walked toward him on Thomas Bedford's arm, having asked the storekeeper to give her away in the absence of her own family. The celebration afterward was joyous and boisterous, with music and dancing in the town square continuing well into the night. As the festivities began to wind down, Flynn took Tabitha's hand and led her to their wagon for the journey to their home. News reached them the following spring that Jonathan Wells had been arrested in Denver on charges of kidnapping and criminal conspiracy. Lily's testimony, along with that of several other women Flynn had helped, had finally brought the man to justice. When Flynn read the letter from the Denver marshal confirming Wells' conviction and 20-year sentence, his face showed a complex mixture of emotions: relief, vindication, and a certain peace that Tabitha recognized as the beginning of true healing. 3 years after their wedding, the Norwood family expanded with the birth of their son, Matthew, a strong, healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Sarah, named in honor of the woman whose memory had helped shape the man Flynn had become. Under Tabitha's guidance, the school in Chisholm Ranch flourished, eventually expanding to 3 rooms with 2 additional teachers. The upstairs library that Flynn had envisioned became a reality, housing over 500 volumes that were available not just to students but to the entire community. Flynn's ranch prospered as well, growing to include over 1,000 acres and several hundred head of cattle. He built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, though he incorporated the original cabin as part of the structure, unwilling to erase the place where he and Tabitha had first acknowledged their love. On their 10th anniversary, Flynn presented Tabitha with a journal he had kept since the day they met, a record of his thoughts and feelings, his hopes and fears, as their relationship had evolved from rescuer and rescued to friends to lovers to partners in life. The final entry, dated on their anniversary, read simply, "10 years ago, I told a woman she wasn't leaving with anyone but me. I had no right to make such a claim, no reason to believe she would choose to stay. But by some miracle, she did. And every day since has been a gift I never thought to receive. Tabitha, my love, my heart, my home, thank you for the life we've built together." As they stood on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard with the family dog, Tabitha leaned against Flynn's solid strength, thankful for the strange twist of fate that had brought her west to marry a man she'd never met, only to find her true destiny in the arms of a cowboy who had vowed she wouldn't leave with anyone but him. "Any regrets?" Flynn asked, his arm secure around her waist, his voice holding a contentment that had been hard-won through years of shared joy and sorrow. Tabitha looked up at him, at the face she had come to know as well as her own now, with a few more lines around the eyes, a touch of silver at his temples, but still as handsome to her as the day they met. "Not one," she replied with absolute certainty. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." And as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors no artist could capture, Tabitha and Flynn Norwood stood together, their love a testament to the unexpected journeys that sometimes lead us exactly where we need to go.